Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. US President Donald Trump says peace talks with the Taliban have resumed. Trump said he believes the insurgents will probably agree to a ceasefire in Afghanistan. Speaking on his first trip to Afghanistan, Trump said the US is in the process of substantially reducing the number of troops it has deployed there. The Taliban have responded, saying they are ready to restart the peace talks with the United States. Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said if peace talks start, they will resume from the stage where they were stopped. Trump's Thanksgiving Day visit was his first to Afghanistan since becoming president and came a week after a prisoner swap between Washington and Kabul. For more on this developing story, we are joined by Intizar Khadim, analyst from Kabul. Thank you for taking time out for Indus News. Mr. Intizar, Trump has expressed optimism that the Taliban will agree to a ceasefire. Do you have the similar hopes?
Donald Trump came to Kabul and he was speaking to media with mixed messages. From one side, he was telling stories of the colossus economic and political power of America to the world. After that, he was trying to tell the Taliban leadership that Americans have flexibility to talk to you again and resume that. As Zabihullah Mujahid, the spokesperson of Taliban, asserted that the talk would resume from where it stopped and stalled, I think I'm feeling the same way, but with addition that there could be a revision both from the Taliban side and from the American side, because for the first round, there has been a simple trust, mutual trust between American and Taliban, but there has been slips and a little bit deviation from the promises they made toward each other. This time there could be an addition of two-side promises, which would be guaranteed by guarantors in the region, in the world. So I think that was a surprise, and that will have a specific impact on the security issues, election and peace in Afghanistan as well.
Mr. Intizar, the US was previously inclined to accept a reduction in violence by the Taliban. Has it now adopted President Ashraf Ghani's tougher line of the ceasefire?
Well, I think there should be a reduction in two sectors. There should be reduction in the violences from the Taliban side, and there should be reduction in the forces of the Americans existed in Afghanistan. I think that's interconnected issues. Taliban would be promising in ensuring that there should be a de-escalation of violences from Taliban, including the bomb blast and suicide attacks, and there could be a reduction in attacks and counterattacks between Taliban, the American forces, and the Afghan government. But at the same time, Taliban would like to assure themselves that if you would like to step back, you have to step back as well. I mean, the Americans should be following the tree balance or the tree sheet of the mutual promises made by two sides. But Taliban leadership understand that if they announce a ceasefire and they order their Taliban or foot soldiers in the ground who are fighting for the purpose of Taliban leadership, then that will be the weakness position of Taliban. So they would like to announce a ceasefire when they ensure that the American side will be following their promises as well.
Mr. Intizar, Trump is apparently in a sort of a hurry to pull out US forces from Afghanistan. Is there any sort of a danger that Trump's electoral priorities could undermine the peace process in the country?
One thing which is predictable about Donald Trump, that President Trump is unpredictable. I mean, you can expect anything from Donald Trump to do it, but if there was a pull out of the troops, if there is an absolute withdrawal of the American soldiers from Afghanistan, I think that will have collateral damage. If Taliban become part of the political spectrum of Afghanistan and there is no follow-up development aid from international community, including the American government, I think that also will drag the peace deal into collapse. The Taliban leadership understand that sensitivity of the peace deal. So yes, if the abrupt pullout happens, it will have a collateral damage. The Taliban leadership, the Afghan government, and also the Afghan nation, not the Afghan government, but particularly the Afghan nation, would like the American forces to get out of their villages but not get out of their country. Or if I say it, they would like to get out American soldiers from Afghanistan, but they would like to have their presence to ensure stability, democracy, election in the development of the last 18 years.
Mr. Intizar Khadim, thanks for joining us. I would really appreciate that. Now moving on, the OIC has called for an international probe into human rights violations, including serious genocide alerts in Indian-occupied Kashmir. The Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission said it is appalled by the New Delhi's unending, inhumane blockade of the valley. In a statement after its 16th meeting in Jeddah, the Commission strongly condemned India's use of pellet guns, arbitrary arrests and extrajudicial killings. The group agreed to conduct an independent case study into the use of pellet guns in occupied Kashmir. In a stern warning, the group said that these systematic violations amount to ethnic cleansing and genocide. The Commission urged the international community to pressurize India to cease its human rights violations. Indian-occupied Kashmir has been under a lockdown and communications blackout for the past 117 days. Pakistan and China will stage a joint maritime exercise in Arabian Sea in January. China's Ministry of National Defense says the drill was scheduled under the annual military exchange plan between the two countries. Speaking in Beijing, spokesman Ren Guoqiang said China will send destroyers, frigates, supply ships and submarine rescue ships. Ren said the military drill does not target any third party. He said the exercise aims to deepen security cooperation between close allies China and Pakistan and promote maritime safety. Yemen's Houthi rebels claim they shot down a Saudi Apache helicopter near Asir in Saudi Arabia's border zone. A Houthi forces spokesperson, Brigadier General Yahya Sarrai, said 2 soldiers in the aircraft were killed. Sarrai said the helicopter was shot down this morning in the Majza area across from Asir by a surface-to-air missile. Saudi Arabia has not yet commented on the incident. The claims come a day after Riyadh released 188 Houthi rebels from prison. In Yemen, 10 people have been killed in an attack in the country's northern province of Sada. In a statement, the UN humanitarian coordinator for Yemen has said 22 others were wounded in an attack on a popular border market. Lise Grand said 4 children and a woman were among the victims of the attack on the Al-Raku market. She said many of the dead and wounded are Ethiopian migrants. The Al-Raku market is located in Munabe district near the border with Saudi Arabia. No one has yet claimed the responsibility for the attack. Moving on to Iraq, where 45 more people have been shot dead during anti-government protests over the past 24 hours. Medics say dozens of others were wounded as well. 29 demonstrators have been killed in clashes with the security forces in the southern city of Nasiriyah. Thousands of mourners later defied a curfew, taking to the streets to bury their dead after the mass shooting. The latest violence raised the death toll to nearly 400 since protests began last month. Meanwhile, Iran has closed its Mehran border crossing with Iraq on security grounds a day after its consulate in Najaf was set on fire. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has approved funding for a fresh probe into chemical attacks in Syria. Russia refused to fund the investigation after its bid to block the body's budget failed. 19 countries, including Russia and China, voted against the budget, while 106 voted in favor. At the annual meeting of the OPCW in The Hague, the US accused Russia of covering up the use of chemical weapons by its Syrian ally. Russian Alexander Shulgin said the majority of member states again chose to ignore the opinion of Moscow and other major non-Western contributors. Syria's government also criticized the move, saying it rejects political blackmail by the US and its Western allies. After almost 7 weeks of anti-government protests, Lebanon's economy is on the brink of collapse. Fearing mass withdrawals, banks have restricted access to dollars, while prices have risen. Amid the crisis, thousands of young Lebanese are faced with joblessness and financial ruin. This report describes their options.
Weeks into Lebanon's ongoing anti-government protests, interior architect Letitia Nicholas was called in by her boss and told she was fired.
At the end of the month, they spoke to me and asked me to come to the office. And there was a check waiting. It became clear there was no longer going to be a part-time for part salary. And that's it. The office is not going to continue like before.
Letitia's story is a common one in Lebanon today. Although the government is blaming protesters for the economic turbulence, protesters say the economy has been decaying for years. This is just one of the reasons they give for their refusal to leave the streets. But not all young people are protesting for change. Many simply want to leave the country.
I have already applied to a number of companies abroad, not in Lebanon, in the Gulf. In Lebanon, there aren't any opportunities.
Unemployment among young Lebanese is already above 30%. Meanwhile, Lebanese banks are warning of even bleaker times ahead.
The subject is, of course, really upsetting for me, because everything I have built over these years is collapsing in front of me.
According to figures from the World Bank, around a third of Lebanon's population lives in poverty. The body is warning this figure could rapidly increase in the future, something that will only fuel the country's youthful exodus.
It's time for a short break, but coming up next. Hermes, the dronoid to carry medical cargo. And South African chef creates high-end fusion cuisine. Welcome back. North Korea has confirmed it successfully tested a super-large multiple-launch rocket system yesterday. State media says Kim Jong-un expressed great satisfaction with the results of test firing. It said the launch was meant to examine the combat applications of the new system and assess its technical capability. South Korea's foreign ministry said its chief nuclear envoy held telephone talks with the US and Japanese counterparts after the launch. Earlier, Washington and Tokyo said Pyongyang should avoid provocation and abide by the UN Security Council resolutions. Sudan's Transitional Council has approved a law to dismantle the regime of former President Omar al-Bashir. The order also included the dissolution of al-Bashir's political party and confiscation of all its properties. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok said the law was not an act of revenge. He said it is meant to preserve the dignity of the Sudanese people. Hamdok said his government passed the law to establish justice and to recover people's looted wealth. The legislation was passed during a joint meeting of Sudan's Sovereign Council and the cabinet. The body also scrapped a law regulating women's dress and behavior. The protest group, the Sudanese Professionals Association, said it was an important step on the path to a democratic state. Chile's government has held its first dialogue with protesters to resolve the country's month-old social unrest. Meanwhile, the central bank announced a $20 billion injection into the economy to support the tumbling Chilean peso. A government delegation led by Interior Minister Gonzalo Belomel met the Social Unity Board representing protesters. The protesters want a 50% increase in the minimum wage and the replacement of the Pinochet-era private pension system. Chile's worst social unrest in 3 decades has battered its economy and hit the production of copper, its most important industry. Protesters outside the presidential palace called for President Sebastián Piñera to take responsibility for police brutality.
Started shooting and one of those pellets hit me in the eye. Due to bad luck, I lost my right eye. My eye was taken out and now I am waiting to receive a prosthesis in order to return to a normal life.
Health organizations say over 200 people have suffered severe eye trauma, mostly due to rubber bullets. Piñera has promised that violations of human rights by security forces will be investigated. Now moving on, the Friday for Future movement has kicked off a fresh round of demonstrations around the world against climate change. Protesters have rallied in the streets of smoke-covered Sydney, picketing the headquarters of Australia's ruling party. The protesters held placards reading "You are burning our future" and chanted "We will rise." Australia has been devastated by hundreds of raging bushfires over recent weeks in what some are calling a climate emergency. 6 people have died and hundreds of homes have been destroyed in the fires, which scientists say has been worsened by rising temperatures. Climate activists have also come out in Melbourne and Tokyo to raise awareness. More protests are scheduled for today in Paris, Madrid, Berlin, and Marseille. A United Nations senior refugee official has expressed alarm and worry over Europe's lack of support for unaccompanied children. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, said frontline state Greece is disproportionately burdened, hosting thousands of migrants. Grandi said Europe must come up with a policy to ease the crisis.
Europe has to get its act together on these issues anyway. You know, the Dublin principles that everybody has to go and seek asylum in the first country in Europe in which they enter was perhaps okay 20 years ago when there were few people, but is completely inadequate now. So Europe has to have a new system that is based more on sharing, on responsibility sharing.
The European Space Agency has been given a budget of nearly $16 billion to expand its operations over the next 5 years. Funding for the agency's space program was approved by ministers from 22 member states at a 2-day meeting in Spain. ESA Director General Jan Warner said the amount is more than the agency expected. He said most of the budget is committed to the ESA's Copernicus program, a group of satellites that measures the status of the planet. The ESA's budget is dwarfed by America's funding for NASA, which is on track to spend $19.5 billion this year. In Poland, Spartax is a company that makes drones. It has just demonstrated its latest design called Hermes, built to carry medical and pharmaceutical cargo on a preset route. This report reveals more about the flying drone.
The skies are crowded with competition by drone makers. The very latest is Hermes, a drone-like vehicle that can fly without the aid of a human pilot. It is making a successful 8.5-kilometer test flight near the Spartax headquarters in the town of Mykolo. It will soon be making journeys between a blood bank and the Institute of Cardiology in Warsaw.
This version here is made for medical transportation. It may transport medical samples, blood, and other cargoes related to the medical and pharmaceutical industry. This drone is equipped with a special medical container, which is fixed here, but this part of the drone may be replaced by a different one.
Hermes is the company's most advanced project, but a tour of the premises reveals other prototypes that appear to have emerged straight out of science fiction.
These are usually products made for a specific customer. I can reveal that we are now preparing special drones for working in the mines. They enter underground galleries. They are specially built for that purpose and are made to detect threats going into places too dangerous for people. We will be working on this project for a big Polish company.
Aside from these, the company has an anti-drone model able to destroy the battery of an enemy drone. Building reconnaissance drones for the army or border guards makes up a large percentage of Spartax models.
A Southampton-born French-inspired South African chef is taking the culinary world by storm. In his restaurant, he serves dishes inspired by Thai, Moroccan and Mexican cooking. The gastronome wants to make high-end cuisine accessible to many and to educate people on eating fresh and well-cooked food.
Meet Wandile Mabaso, chef and owner of Le Creatives restaurant that has created a stir in the South African city of Johannesburg. Driven and classically trained by the world's greatest chefs, Mabaso is determined to do things his way. His restaurant serves a high-end fusion of contemporary French South African cuisine.
I don't write recipes, I don't cook by recipe. I just get inspiration from nature, things around me, current situations, climate, the weather.
Mabaso uses familiar South African ingredients such as maize flour, the popular spicy relish chakalaka, and even rooibos tea in some cocktails. He says he wants his guests to enjoy the memories of their township through the food.
What I love most about the food is that it's unexpected. Every night it's different and the food is fresh, it's fresh produce.
And so I love the passion, I love the ambition behind this place.
With elements of unpredictability and surprise, Mabaso hopes his cuisine can inspire the next generation of chefs.
European stock markets are trading lower amid strained relations between the US and China over anti-government protests in Hong Kong. Sentiments have been dampened by concerns over an expected trade deal between the two biggest economies. Frankfurt's DAX index has shed over 0.5%. London's FTSE 100 is also trading over 0.5% lower, despite stock in the e-tailer Ocado rising 14%. British online grocer Ocado has signed a technology partnership with Japan's Aeon to help the retailer establish an online business, its first deal in Asia. The CAC 40 in Paris dipped fractionally as French GDP grew by a fraction in the third quarter, in line with preliminary estimates. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost the most today, closing over 2% lower, while Kospi shed nearly 1.5%. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.